Right, so Renaud Camus has made this tweet discussing the notion of a conspiracy theory, right? And this is a tension that troubles a lot of us because, of course, there's no doubt that there's a great replacement going on, right? Oh, I've untranslated it, that doesn't matter. There's a great replacement going on. But of course, at the same time, we don't want to be represented or allow ourselves to be represented as understanding that in crude conspiratorial terms, right? Because conspiracy theorists are people like Alex Jones and Ian Carroll and Candace Owens, and they're either charlatans or morons or both, right? So let's read what Renaud says about this. He says, "What a debt we owe to those wonderful journalists who kept repeating conspiracy theory, conspiracy theory. They were trying to tell us something, those good people. And me, the utter fool that I was, exhausting myself repeating, not at all, not at all. I never mentioned the slightest conspiracy, right? I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Don't lump me in with those people." And it was true. It was true he had never mentioned the slightest conspiracy, but he was wrong, right? Of course, the word conspiracy is 10 million times too small. And besides, the genocide by Great Replacement is not a conspiracy, since a conspiracy is supposed to be secret, but this one is laid bare in broad daylight, right? This is a really important part. This is where we start to understand that it's not a conspiracy in the crude sense, right? So this conspiracy is laid bare in broad daylight, even if the victims are drugged not to see it, right? Drugged ideologically, right? Drugged by this bourgeois speech code which forbids us to be honest about the reality of race, right? drugs us to think that it's bad form or just forbidden speech to notice that we're being replaced, right? Even if the victims are drugged not to see it, and above all not to admit it under threat of ideological damnation, right? I mean, what could be clearer than the fact that is what is happening, right? All of those right-thinking, respectable, petit bourgeois conformists don't want to admit that race is real and don't want to admit that we're being racially replaced, right? Because they have to belong to, the culture, and they have to conform with the bourgeois speech code that forbids you to have your eyes open. They're in the cave. They're blinded by ideology, obviously, right? And I think almost anybody can see that now. It seems like the whole replacist infrastructure is crumbling in front of our eyes, isn't it? I'm not rare. Perhaps I was a bit rarer a few years ago. I don't feel so rare now in recognizing this. It seems that everybody can see it now. The internet broke the mechanism of ideology, it seems, right? So what do we have here? Yeah, it's laid bare. But there's the threat of ideological damnation. But that there is a tremendous political, ideological, financial, managerial, mechanical, cybernetic will, more a logic than an intentionality, to the destruction of Europeans in Europe, is glaring, right? So, yeah, that's clear, isn't it? It's systemic, and he says it's more a logic than an intentionality. It's the bourgeois speech code, as I call it, right? It's the logic of liberalism, right? You can't be a liberal and an egalitarian and admit that we've destroyed our societies by being in denial about the reality of race, right? You can't be an egalitarian liberal while admitting that we're being ethnically or racially replaced in our own homelands, and that might not be, a good thing. That actually our homelands might never be the same. They might no longer be our homelands if we allow ourselves to be racially replaced in them. So this is why it's not a conspiracy, right? It's more a logic than an intentionality. It's the logic of the liberal paradigm, right? It's the bad ontology of the liberal paradigm which has allowed this to happen, right? Such that there's no way of getting out of this without getting out of the liberal paradigm, right? Because the replacement is the logic of the liberal paradigm. We've got to face up to reality. about race in order to face up to reality, because race is a fundamental part of sociological reality, right? Um, so yeah, it's more a logic than an intentionality. So it's not a conspiracy in the sense that it's not an intentionality. The likes of Macron and Starmer don't know what they're doing. They're just caught up in the cave. They're caught up in the bourgeois speech code. They're caught up in the paradigm. They can't see outside it or think outside it, you know? They're just in the cave. Yeah. So it's not a conspiracy in the sense that it's not an intentionality, but yeah, there is nonetheless a tremendous political, ideological, financial, managerial, mechanical, cybernetic will to the destruction of the Europeans of Europe, right?